Hello, friends. Blessings to you. Welcome to Ignited Life Now, Prophetic Worldview. Man, I'm excited about this program, this opportunity to present to you my guest. And I just want to introduce him real quick. Andy Schectman. He is the CEO of milesfranklin.com. Milesfranklin.com. Thank you so much for coming on, sir.
The pleasure is mine, Mr. Faircloth. The pleasure is mine. And crazy interesting times we live in. You know, that's a Chinese curse. May you live in interesting times. I personally prefer the days before cell phones and when times were calm and complacent and dull. It just seems that every single day now there's something to deal with. And when I started doing these podcasts almost 4 years ago, I'm very fond of a term called logarithmic decay. And I find it's very apropos in so many things that we try to measure in this world we live in. And it's kind of like the Niagara Falls, where the pitch starts to decline little by little by little by little by little, then boom, all at once. And when I started doing these podcasts, it was little by little.
Yeah.
By little, and now it's little by little by little by little by little. Every day there's something new, something to talk about. So certainly it's good to be here. Lots to chat about, and I appreciate the invite. I'll follow your lead. Let's chat.
Sounds great, and thanks again for coming on. I first heard you on Mike Adams, the Health Ranger, and man, you just blew me away. It was a great blessing. My wife is a financial executive, and she was listening while doing some paperwork. And she said, that guy knows what he's talking about. So, it was great confirmation.
Thank your wife for me, please.
Yeah, I will. And it was great confirmation. And she works in the auto industry, and, they're taking a big hit. So she's fully aware, it's a global market. And I saw you on there and I was like, yeah. I need to talk to Andy, Mr. Schectman. I need to talk to you, to bring to our audience, which I think the audience is about the same as who you've been speaking to, but in a biblical way, in a perspective that the church can understand. We're at war. There's no doubt about it. Proverbs 27:12 talks about a prudent person. He always sees danger and then he does what's right, and a fool just kind of goes into it blindly. We don't want to do that in this hour. So we're talking about war. We're talking about the death of the dollar. And I just want to bring that out to you in the question of, obviously war is never good. And it's a racket, as it's always been said. We know it's for cover-ups. It's for whatever. What do you see coming out of this global moment? Because it's not just Hamas and Israel. It's Russia. It's, Ukraine and all the other stuff. What does it look like for the economy globally?
Well, I think sides are being chosen. I guess it remains to be seen how this all plays out. Maybe this is about dragging the U.S. into a war with Iran. The wars are a distraction to perhaps even a bigger problem. And one of the things that bothers me the most about, at least from an American perspective, is you go back and look at history of this country, and the one thing that was always true was that overall the country was united. There was a respect for authority, a respect for God. There was a different mentality in the United States. And even if you came from different ideologies or viewpoints, overall people respected one another.
Right.
You could have a good conversation over dinner, even with different viewpoints, and walk away respecting and still being close. And now the divisiveness in this country on so many levels has, I think, made our the prospects of coming out of this in the right way a little less than I'm comfortable with, whether you're talking red versus blue or black versus white or vaccine versus no vaccine or rich versus poor, or, you used to never be defined by the person you voted for in the last election. And so when I look at what's happening with the wars, yes, they're awful. It's an atrocity on both fronts, but it's a distraction to a far bigger problem that we have here in the United States and really as our global reserve currency. I mean, let's just look at a couple of them. I can think of 10 or 12 off the top of my head. Look, we've now had to raise the debt ceiling more or less twice recently. We've come as close to defaulting on our debt as at any time in decades. We removed the Speaker of the House for the first time in history. We now have our second war breaking out, this being between Israel and Palestine, of course. We have mortgage rates that have hit their highest level in almost 25 years. We have the problem in Palestine, Ohio. We have the problem in Hawaii with 17,000 acres burned to the ground. We have OPEC setting voluntary production cuts. We have oil at its highest level in over a year. We have record $17.1 trillion household debt. We have a record 12 trillion in mortgages. We have a record 1.6 trillion in auto loans. And how about record in 1 trillion in credit card debt? And maybe even the most disgusting of all, the largest asset of the United States is also a record 1.6 trillion in student loans, wow, which is considered the largest asset of the United States, an asset base of $5 trillion backed up against 155 trillion in debt. And everyone says, well, what about, I thought it was 33 trillion. It is, but you also have Medicare, Medicaid, Social Security, and government military pensions, amongst other entitlements, which are off balance sheet, which add up to about $130 trillion. And I think people really lack perspective when we talk about how big a trillion is. A trillion seconds ago was 31,688 years ago. So you put that in conjunction with the divisiveness and the lack of unity in this country between things like transgenderism and cancel culture and censorship and all of these things that have now become somehow, little by little by little by little, then bang, all at once, have become part of the fabric of this country. And then you look at what's going on outside the border. Yes, we have wars, they're horrible, but we have weaponizing of the dollar, which has pushed half of the world away from the US and has been the rallying cry to bring these countries together in opposition to the Western hegemony and the Western coercion, the Western hypocrisy. You look at Iraq as an example. We go into Iraq in 2003. They would tell you it was illegally in the search of weapons of mass destruction. And oops, sorry, we didn't find any. Right? Well, we just toppled your regime, blew up your country. Well, they just made trading in dollars illegal. If you have a business and you are caught trading in dollars, you'll go to prison and your business will be shut down. As of January 1st, 2024, all dollar transactions will be made illegal. And when you talk about the way the world looks at the United States, just in 2022 alone, Iraq had $90 billion in oil revenue that they generated from selling their oil. And all of it has to go back to the New York Federal Reserve where it's held in an account. And they just asked them, hey, can we please have $1 billion of our 90? We need it for whatever we need it for. And they said, no, they turned them down. Amazing. So when you think about the way the U.S. is viewed globally, it is not the way it once was. And I think these wars only, you could argue, are a distraction to the real problems, but only make the ultimate problem far worse. And we are not gaining much in the way of brownie points around the world with the way we are conducting ourselves, either militarily, financially, economically. And even when you talk about what made this country what it was, I mean, look, people sailed here on inner tubes tied together with strings from Cuba or walked from Central America to find liberty and justice. And you have to ask yourself, is liberty and justice something that really is what it was? Or is it really, you have to look at it and say, what's going on in the United States? Is there a two-tier system? Is justice being applied equally? The things that made this country special seem to be frayed and going by the wayside. So yes, war is awful, but I think it's part and parcel to just a whole big mess of uncertainty. And this is why before we talk at all about gold and silver, I just want people to understand that to me, gold and silver are not an investment, not even close.
Right.
Gold and silver are wealth. They're biblical. They go back to the beginning of time through 2 world wars, German hyperinflation, the Great Depression, any pandemic, anything the world has ever thrown at it, all the way back to times of Pharaoh, kings and queens and emperors. They all own gold as a form of immutable wealth, not as an investment. And to me, that's how I look at it. And if you look at it that way, it makes a whole lot more sense when you see the most well-funded and well-informed traders on the planet, the central banks, have accumulated more over the last 18 months than at any time in history. So that should be the foundation from how we continue this conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. And I want to interject. There's a lot to unpack there, anyways, but I want to interject. This is not an infomercial whatsoever for gold and silver. We're going to get to all that later, but this is, I was thinking about it this morning when I was praying and meditating on talking with you. We're in a convergence moment. And when I mentioned war, you hit it on the head. It's a culture war. It's societal. It's ethnic. I mean, it's all over the board. Everybody's at war with each other, and there's no way that economies can survive and strive, if you will, in that atmosphere. Somebody's going to bleed somewhere. So you put it really, really together in a nutshell. You spoke about the debt, the derivatives. We didn't even talk about the derivatives. Doesn't that put us way much more than what's on the books, right?
Well, the derivatives are thought to be in the neighborhood of a quadrillion, a trillion, I believe or is that 1,000 trillion? I think it's 1,000 trillion.
Too much.
It's too much to even fathom. But yes,
Yeah.
the whole problem with derivatives is that they're based upon what I believe will be the worst buzzword in the coming months and years, and that is counterparty risk. And mind you, that's one of the things about precious metals is that they're assets that are not simultaneously someone else's liability. There is no counterparty risk, but with a derivative is valued via the counterparty's ability to make good. And this is the systemic nature of things these days when you have a quadrillion in derivatives. When you look at just the top 4 commercial banks, like JP Morgan, Citibank, Goldman Sachs, Bank of America, they have somewhere in the neighborhood of $150 trillion, just those banks, in global derivatives. If one counterparty fails, what does it do to the rest? It's a daisy chain. It's like they're all interconnected, like the hair on your head. It's it's not perfect. They're all tangled together. If you look real close, well, that's a derivative. If one piece breaks, then, well, if this counterparty breaks, it messes up that guy who's got 12 deals with these people and 18 deals with these people, and the whole thing blows up.
Dominoes.
That's right. It's a domino chain. And you're right. When you talk about derivatives, it's a very, very big deal. And most of these derivatives, a lot of these derivatives are centered around interest rates. And interest rates have risen so fast. Right. When we go back to the 2008 financial crisis, the reason they had to bail out AIG, which was the reinsurer, was because of something called credit default swaps, where the banks take these bets they make and they reinsure them with a company like AIG. Well, the losses were so massive like that if they didn't bail out AIG, the dominoes of all the counterparties blowing up would have, as we were told after the fact, would have brought down the whole system in a matter of moments. So that's the problem when you have this massive, massive tangling of derivatives that really no one even knows the health of them or the total value of them because of all the counterparties. And, that's why when, for example, Credit Suisse failed, they needed to be bailed out by UBS or it could have brought down the system. This is a very big problem that I think is yet to really rear its head.
Wow. Absolutely. I mean, it's just dangerous times for sure. And, you were mentioning United States and how we do our monetary warfare, if you will. I mean, just look what they did with Russia with SWIFT. We always use that. That's our go-to dagger, pull out the SWIFT. And you could explain that here in a second, but that weaponry against the nations and threaten them. It's sort of like the mafia. I feel, and you correct me on this, but I feel that the nations are done. We're done being threatened by the bully. We see that you have a chink in your armor if you're even wearing armor. The emperor has no clothes, that type of attitude. And I've taught this over the years, people in America don't understand. China is a dynasty. Russia is, that oligarch, that dynasty, empires. These guys have long-term generational views of wealth and dominance and survivability, where we're still young. I mean, we're coming up on 250 years here in the next couple of years of existence. And I don't think we understand their resilience. And so I think the nations, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, Andy, I think the nations are just tired of being bullied. And I think that's where we are. What do you say?
100%. But yet, in and of themselves, there's not a lot these nations have ever really been able to do. But they're finding strength in numbers. They're finding unity in all of the countries that are joining together. I mean, for example, you look at the Belt Road Initiative, the largest infrastructure project in human history, which is China's way for connecting Asia, Africa, South America, parts of Europe. Right now, it's 75% of human population, 50% of global GDP. That's just part of it. You have the BRICS, Brazil, Russia, India, China, South Africa, plus the new 6 countries who joined, including United Arab Emirates, Iran, and Saudi Arabia. You have the majority of all the oil production in the world. You have Argentina, which is the largest natural gas producer in South America and controls the Straits of Magellan. You have the Straits of Hormuz controlled by Egypt and the Middle East countries. You have a rallying cry that is pushing back against the dollar hegemony, against the bullying, like what we talked about, Iraq, against the hypocrisy. The glue that will make it work, I believe, will be gold, because the Bank of International Settlements, which is the central bank, the most powerful bank in the world, in 2019 quietly reclassified gold as the world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. Now let that sink in for a second. The world's only other tier 1 reserve asset. Shh, be very quiet about it. Google it. It'll pop right up. They didn't tell us on CNN or Fox.
No, never heard it.
Since the end of World War II, there's been one tier 1 reserve asset, US dollars and treasuries. And now all of a sudden it's gold. Do you think there's any coincidence that the central banks of the world have bought more over the last 18 months than in any time in history? And ever since they have, and even a year and a half before they made this announcement, the central banks of Europe have gone on a massive, not only buying spree, but also a repatriation spree. They have repatriated their gold from the New York Fed and the Bank of England to hold it, because it is an asset that has no counterparty risk. But I truly do believe that it will be the peg to a new system, a system that has lost its way, a system that is based upon debt instruments and promises, rather than what I think we are heading into, a new system that will be based upon commodities and transparency. No one wants promises anymore. And I think they want something legitimate. And that's where a marriage of blockchain and central bank digital currencies and gold pegging to a new system will come up from the ashes. And certainly I've talked a lot about that, and we could get deeper into that if you'd like. But yes, it is the Western hegemony that the world is rallying against, and the Western hypocrisy that the world is rallying against. And look, these countries have their own issues amongst themselves. The rallying cry is, look at what's happening. The glue that will make it stick will be giving every country equal say at the table. And how do you do that? You use that by each country who is now repatriating their gold and massively accumulating it, pledging it to a new system with distributed ledger technology, denoting the veracity and the immutability. You have it audited, you have it legitimate, you have it transparent, and all of a sudden you have a system that has trust. Because the United States has lost a lot of its trust, whether it be in its currency, the mismanagement of it, or the way that, the mismanagement of our political decisions. I think when you realize, as an example, in the past 18 days, the United States has added $444 billion to the deficit. That's an $11 trillion annualized debt or
Wow.
addition to the debt. It took this country 199 years to accumulate the first 450 billion. We did it in the last 18 days. The
Wow.
acceleration of
Wow.
the debasement of the currency, the destruction of the value of the dollar is look, since they raised the debt ceiling, we're at basically $2 trillion added to the debt. It took this country over 210 years to do that. And here we are. And so you're talking about a situation where I think, to your point, the world has had it. And now they're finding safety in numbers. When you talk about the BRICS nations, not only are you talking about the majority of all the oil production in the world because of OPEC, the majority of every OPEC country is on the Belt Road. Half of them now are in the BRICS. You're talking the second and third largest nuclear arsenals on the planet, the second and third largest economies, or excuse me, the second, Japan's not in it yet, but they will be. The second largest economy with China. This goes on and on. They hold the majority of the rare earth metals. They hold the majority of all the commodities and the majority of human population. When you put together BRICS, the Belt Road, the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, and the Eurasian Economic Union, all these countries, all these organizations are tied together. In fact, President of Belarus just called for a meeting to join together the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the Eurasian Economic Union, and the BRICS. And by the way, in the last year, Iran has joined both the BRICS and the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, as has Saudi Arabia. And Shanghai Cooperation Organization is the largest regional military and financial corporation, organization in the world. And so you put all these people together, you're talking almost 85% of human population. Wow. And they're not going green, and they are joining together, and they are rallying together against the hypocrisy and the hegemony. So yes, this is a very, very big deal. And the worst part about it is that most people have no idea that this is happening right underneath their nose, and you can't get out of the way of what you don't see coming. But the ramifications of the dollar losing its petro reserve status is extraordinary. And I ask people all the time, what makes the dollar the world reserve currency? Very few people know. Well, there are three things. One, the protection of the Saudi kingdom since 1974 is what has made the dollar the petrodollar. We protect Saudi Arabia, and by extension, OPEC will value oil globally in dollars. That's over. They've signed a protection agreement with Russia. They've joined the SCO. They've joined the BRICS. They're selling their oil for other currencies. They told people in Davos at the World Bank meeting, we're open to taking other currencies. That's over. So when you talk about, okay, the full faith and credit of the U.S. government, okay, 155 trillion in debt, 5 trillion in assets, the largest portion of that asset base being student debt of 1.6 trillion. You take that out, we have 3.5 trillion in assets backed up against 155 trillion in debt. We're insolvent. We're 130% debt to GDP. And you go back through history, there has never, ever been a time, ever in history, our country crosses 130% debt to GDP and has not defaulted in some form. Well, how about the faith of this country? Well, we already discussed that ad nauseum a little bit anyway, where, we're lacking in our faith category. So faith, check. Credit, check. Petrodollar, check. What happens when the world says, or Saudi Arabia and OPEC says, hey, listen, right when you took office, President Biden, you signed an executive order telling us in the world that by 2030, you'll be at least 50% green, by 2050, completely green. So look, we appreciate all you've done for us, but we've decided to take other currencies for oil. Maybe it's the new soon-to-be BRICS currency that will be pegged to gold, or maybe it will be gold, or maybe it'll be yuan, or maybe it'll be ruble, but whatever it is, if it's not the dollar, bang, like that. Every single country on the planet that has had to stockpile dollars for the past 50 years no longer has any incentive to do so. So they'll drop them in favor of other assets. And when they do, and you see this tsunami of dollars coming to hit our shores, the byproduct of that is hyperinflation. The byproduct of hyperinflation are accelerating interest rates to compensate for the loss of purchasing power. And as that happens, that is inversely correlated to stock prices, bond prices, real estate prices, along with the dumping dollar. There is your great reset. Stocks, bonds, dollars, and real estate all collapse at the exact same time. That's your Klaus Schwab moment. Now, was it intended? And that's one thing that I'd like to really just touch on for one moment.
Please.
either our government is completely and wholeheartedly evil, and this is what they're intending to do, or they're just completely inept. And I think it's the first. I think it's the former. I think that this is planned. And the reason I say that is that there are two economic advisors to this administration. The first is a man named Jared Bernstein, who has a degree in music. He played the oboe in college, and he has a degree in music and a master's degree in social work. He is the lead economic advisor to the United States government, and his main thesis is to abolish the world reserve currency, the world reserve standard. He says it is an exorbitant privilege the U.S. can no longer afford. He wrote reports that were picked up in the New York Times called Dethrone King Dollar. And when Trump put the tariffs on China, he said, good, hopefully we'll lose our world reserve status. The number two in charge in terms of economic policy is Lael Brainerd, who is a modern monetary theorist. And her whole objective is to get rid of all the banks, except a handful of commercial banks, and to issue a central bank digital currency. When she was at the Fed 2 years ago, a year and a half ago, she worked with MIT in developing the central bank digital currency. That President Biden also signed in an executive order because the Bank of International Settlements said, along with reclassifying gold as the only other tier one asset in the world, that by 2025, every single country must have an operational central bank digital currency. And she recently ran point on FedNow, which just came out. FedNow is the Federal Reserve's form of Venmo or Zelle. You watch, within less than a year, there will be no more checks. It will be FedNow. So all of the banks will have FedNow. So as an example, someone calls me on a Sunday night and says, listen, I want to buy $1 million worth of gold from you. Well, I can't do that right now. I mean, Sunday night, I don't have your money. There's too much volatility in this world. No, I just FedNow'd you. It's in your account. Here's the receipt.
Wow.
Oh, okay,
wow.
Great. So people will, it's kind of the appetizer to the central bank digital currency main course. People will find it to be extraordinarily convenient. And, you know, you take a convenience and you give up some privacy or some of your rights, they ain't never coming back. So I think there are some things that are very much for sure. And that is, we will see a central bank digital currency. It is coming. The BIS mandates it. It is in production right now. In fact, if you take 95% of the global gross domestic product and the countries behind that 95%, every single one of them has a central bank digital currency right now in development. So things that we are talking about are real. They are happening. And either you realize it and take the steps to protect yourself, or you stick your head in the sand like an ostrich, and you're not going to notice what is coming. And it's one of these deals where I think it'll happen, whatever it is, on a Sunday night, Monday morning. There will be no time to react. Either you have prepared reluctantly, like Noah, or you get run over by it. And I think, unfortunately, most people have no clue what's about to happen.
Yeah, and that's the reason why we're together, Andy, and we're doing these podcasts. You know, I don't want nobody ran over. I don't want anybody left behind, if you will, in financial disasters. And I think there's things you can do to prepare yourself. And we're going to get into that in a minute, because right now you've answered so many questions right there, and I'm sure those that are listening, they're probably smoke coming out of their ears because of the voluminous information. But I find it funny. I never see this on CNN. So you're giving us the truth. And having said that, you know, I'm looking back at my notes here because you just hit everything on point. One of the things that most people don't understand, we know there's bank failures and bailouts. We get that. We've seen it. We know that's part of their ideology to cull, if you will, these banks, and then come into that centralized bank and digital currency, which, again, from a biblical perspective, it's towards the mark of the beast that we believe, and all those things. But having said that, there's also bail-ins that are coming. And again, majority of the people don't understand a bail-in. So we're going to kind of move towards the end of this conversation in a moment. But bail-ins, would you take a minute and just kind of explain it in the most simplest way?
Sure. So first of all, before I do, let's just discuss the problem with the banks, and then I'll tell you what a bail-in is. And so over the last several years, with interest rates so low, Well, during the pandemic, the president said to the banks, you don't have to hold anything in the way of reserves. You can have zero reserves. In other words, you deposit money in the bank and they have very, very little in cash to pay you back if you need it. And so the way that it works is that when you deposit money into a bank, it is your asset, it is the bank's liability. By law, the banks have to offset that liability with an asset. And traditionally, that asset would be something considered very safe and secure, such as a 10-year treasury. And they would also buy mortgage-backed securities, which are bundling of 30-year mortgages. But let's just focus on the 10-year treasuries for a moment. 2020, 2021, 2022, you have interest rates on the federal funds rate near zero. So the 10-year treasury yields would have been 1 or 2%. So these banks are loaded up with 10-year treasuries that, in essence, are paying between 1 and 2%, when the yield on the 10-year treasury right now is just under 5%. In other words, the Fed incentivized all these banks to load up on treasuries at rock bottom yields, and then they jack up rates like that.
Wow.
And these banks have very little in reserves, right? So if everyone says we want our cash back, like in the case of Silicon Valley Bank and Signature Bank, and there was no cash because they don't have any, they relinquished their reserves, they have to sell their treasuries in order to meet redemption demand, which in 36 hours put them out of business. Those treasuries are trading at 40, 50 cents, 60 cents on the dollar. Who would want to buy a 10-year treasury from you that's yielding 1.5% when you go right to the treasury right now and buy it at almost 5%? So they're discounted tremendously. Their balance sheets are completely and totally upside down, depending upon who you talk to. It's anywhere between 600 billion and 2 trillion in unrealized losses until there's a run on the banks. And I do believe that will happen. In fact, the Federal Reserve is aiding and abetting this overture or this exodus out of the banks. And we can talk about that, but they're simply allowing the overnight reverse repo market to take money market funds by the too big to fail banks. There's a lot to chew on here, but the bottom line is they are helping these banks collapse because the regional banks, we are told, will be bailed in. I'll get to that in a moment. The too big to fail banks, we're told, won't be. They'll be bailed out. And so the too big to fail banks have money market accounts that the Federal Reserve is allowing them to park that money in the overnight reverse repo market. That's a tool that the Federal Reserve uses, but it guarantees 5.33% with daily liquidity. Or you could be in a regional bank that has an upside down balance sheet that if they fail, they're in big trouble. We'll talk about that in a second. And the best rate you can get is about 4.5% in a 1-year certificate of deposit. You have to wait 1 year versus 5.3% with overnight liquidity in a money market in a too big to fail bank. So that sucking sound you hear is all the money being sucked out of the regional banking system into the commercial banks. But what's even worse than that is all of the commercial bank money is leaving even faster than the regional bank money is and going directly to the Treasury at a place called treasurydirect.gov, where you can buy short-term treasuries right from the Treasury and pull all of the bank systemic risk out of the equation. So the banking system is contracting. It is culling. The regional banks, all that money is flowing. The commercial smart money is leaving the banking system altogether. And when you see the next bank failure, you will see a bank bail-in. What is a bail-in?
Right.
At the end of the 2008 financial crisis, the Dodd-Frank law was passed.
Yes.
And it said that if banks ever fail again, they are to be bailed in, not bailed out. I'm going to talk about something in 1 second here, but that bail in means you are an unsecured general creditor of the bank, which means that anything over the FDIC $250,000 limit, it goes into the kitty. It's gone forever. It is used to bail in the bank and their stupid decisions. And what you will get out of it, if there's anything left, it will be pro rata divided back out, or you get shares in what is now a defaulted bank. And you hope a company like JP Morgan picks them up so you get something. But, you know, when Silicon Valley Bank failed, they were bailed out. And there was outrage about this. Right. The senator from Oklahoma said, Madam Secretary, as he's talking to Janet Yellen, you just bailed out this bank. That was made illegal in 2009. What am I missing?
Hmm.
Said, well, we as a group determined that the bank was too systemic, and that if they failed, they would bring down the system. But
Wow.
this won't affect the taxpayer. This will be done by FDIC, which is a bunch of malarkey anyway. And he
Yeah.
said, well, let me get this straight. So if a bank fails in Oklahoma, does that mean you're going to make my constituent whole? And she said, no, 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 absolutely not. It will require an uber majority decision from the FOMC, which is the Federal Reserve, myself, the President of the United States, and the FDIC. That is the only way a bank will be bailed out. So what
Hmm.
does that mean? That means that I believe what they're setting the stage. And why do I think they're setting the stage? Let's just look at Silicon Valley Bank for 1 second.
Hmm.
When there was an inquiry into that, they had the president of the bank there, and the senator says to this guy, he says, let me ask you a question. In 2020, 2021, and 2022, you had 10 checking accounts, 10 checking accounts
Right.
that for 3 years carried a $14 billion balance in 10
Wow.
checking accounts.
Wow.
So on average, each one of those accounts had $1.4 billion in a checking account, earning almost zero in interest, with
Hmm.
no insurance above 250,000. Now, where was risk management for the corporations?
Right.
Where was risk management from the bank? Where was risk management from the FDIC? That money earning 0.00011 could have gone, you could have put 98% of all that money into US treasuries with no risk at all and earning 100 times what it was getting paid in this bank. So instead, they bailed it out. It seems to me that bank should have been bailed in and just exploded because of the
Yeah.
poor management, risk
Right.
management, and the fact that, it's made illegal to do that. It has to
Right.
be bailed in. So what it basically means is you are an unsecured general creditor of the bank.
Hmm.
And the next bank that fails, I believe they will bail it in. And you watch what happens when people realize, oh my gosh, he just lost everything. The church has 5 million in operating capital and they're in PNC Bank, and bang, PNC is gone. The church is upside down. The church is going to close its doors. What are we going to do? Because all of that money is gone.
Right.
And people don't understand that. It is law. It was written into
Right.
law. And I
Yes.
think it will create a sense of panic that this country has never experienced before, because it's one thing for me to tell you stocks and bonds and real estate are overvalued and the bricks and the bad things. It's another thing for me to tell you the money in your bank, that's
Yeah.
not safe at all. And how
Yeah.
about FDIC? It's a joke.
Yeah.
It's a
Nothing.
lie. 128 billion in assets backing 18 trillion in deposits. Do the math. It doesn't work
Wow.
out so well. In fact, when
Wow.
Silicon Valley Bank failed, FDIC was lent $174 billion from the Federal Reserve to enact an orderly transition. So the whole system is upside down. Bail-ins, to me, will be the key to the unraveling of the banking system. And that's what they want, because when one bank gets bailed in, everyone runs to get their money out. And as
Yeah.
they run to pull their money out, those banks have no money. Remember, they have to sell more 10-year treasuries, puts rates up even higher, and drops the value of the treasury market and hurts more banks, which it's a doom loop. And as one bank yanks its 10-year treasuries out to meet redemption requests, rates go higher, which hurts the rest of the banks, and they all get run on. And you see how this feeds upon
Yeah.
itself.
Yeah.
And very, very quickly, you see a massive bank failure, like
Yeah.
one after the other, after the other, after the other, after the other. It's a big problem. And then you wake up one morning to find, of the 4,500 banks in this country, we're down to 4 or 5. That's what a central bank digital currency modern monetary theorist like Lil Brainerd wants. And that's what they're getting by aiding and abetting the movement out of the banks, and then not telling anyone really about bail-ins. Nobody knows about it.
No.
Google Dodd-Frank Act. It's law, and it will happen. And Google Oklahoma Senator and Janet Yellen in Silicon Valley Bank inquiry, and watch this conversation, and you'll understand what I'm talking about. This, to me, is the linchpin right here. When they pull that pin and the first bank fails that is bailed in, everything in this country like that changes. And I do believe that is what is intended to get this system where they want it, to be able to issue a central bank digital currency, because most people don't want it. Most people say, I don't want
No.
that.
No.
But what
No.
if you lose everything because
Yeah.
everything collapses and they say, listen, have no fear, Lael Brainerd is here. Sign on the dotted line
Yep.
and we will make you whole. Everything that you just lost in your retirement account and your bank account, take the CBDC. We're modern monetary theorists. That means we just print. Go ahead, take it. We'll make you whole. You've lost nothing, but you got to take the CBDC. There's the event that I think they will create in order to make people beg for it rather than reluctantly say, I'm not taking that. I don't want to lose my privacy. Forget
That's
it.
good.
So
That's
that's
really
my
good.
2 cents on that.
No, that's a $1.50 right there. I mean, that information's huge. I mean, I have that Bell and information. Everything you just said is right on the money. You can go Google it. You can find that information. We need 2 hours, man. My mind's just the
I'm happy
synapses
to
are.
come back anytime.
Yeah,
We can make this a 2-part episode and I'll come back and pick, there's a lot to unpack. And I
there is.
appreciate people like you who are speaking the truth
Right.
because, it's hard to find and there
It
aren't a lot
is.
of people speaking the truth. So, if you help just one family,
Yeah.
um, that's great.
Yeah. Let's begin to just bring this down, to bring it down to a simmer, because it's at a boil as far as information is concerned. There's no doubt about it, Andy. It's nefarious, it's self-inflicted, it's suicidal, it's genocidal. I mean, it's just crazy what's going to happen. People are going to lose their minds. There's going to be so much chaos. So we know all that. Uh, I want to ask you this question as we close here. What does this thing look like? I mean, I've read before, with precious metals, you should always hedge your portfolio 5%, 10%, or whatever. I mean, I know there's probably confliction of answers in that market, in that world. But to the average guy or gal that's listening right now, just punching the clock, trying to make it, maybe can afford something, precious metals, maybe cannot, what have you. But what does it look like when this whole thing goes down in flames? It's going to be two-part question. Then we're going to get out of here. The first thing is, let's say I have $100,000 in the bank, and all of a sudden bail-ins come, and we go to see, to the digital currency. Do I get 10% less of that 100,000? Do I get zero? How do they start me back out, if you will? I think it was Iraq. They were giving, I think it was a 1,500% something difference. It was, I don't remember the article right now, but I know you weren't getting your dollar for dollar, if you will. So that's the first thing. How does that look to you? And then the final aspect of that question is, what does having gold and silver, precious metals, assets, hard assets, what does that look like in the new, if you will, economy and plan? Do you take the coin down to the local, shop and buy something? And people are asking this question. I got this hard asset, but what do I do now?
Well, there's almost 20 states in the country. I never thought I'd see this.
Hmm.
Idaho, Alaska, Wyoming, Missouri, Kansas, North Carolina, Arkansas, Oklahoma, Texas, Nevada, Utah. They've passed laws right now that allow gold and silver like this to be used as legal tender if it's a legal tender coin made by a sovereign mint. Some of them just say U.S. mint. Most say any sovereign mint. There's 6 that I speak of: U.S., Canada, Austria, Australia, South Africa, United Kingdom, that can be used for all debts, public and private, including paying your property taxes. And the verbiage reads the melt value of the coin plus any market premium. And so there is a grassroots campaign around the country to allow this to be legal tender, to be used for everything in these states that see what's coming. So there is, thankfully, fortunately, a little bit of pushback. If the CBDC came out in an orderly manner, which I have a hard time believing, I think they would incentivize you to take it. Trade your $1,000, get back 1,150 in the new CBDC.
Okay.
But look, the what if questions, truthfully, are impossible to answer. So I fall back on the fact that gold and silver have been wealth for 5,000 years. The most well-informed money in the world, let alone the biggest money, the central banks have bought more over the last 18 months than any time in history, and they continue to do so. So I think if you have all of these choices in front of you with very little in the way of clarity, to me, you follow what the biggest money in the world is doing, you follow history. And, there are very few things that have lasted the test of time that in the year 3000, you can rest assured that your great, 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 great grandchildren would be using gold and silver. It would still be wealth.
Right.
When the dollar bills in our wallet, when this is hanging from a frame in the Smithsonian as an example of what used to be.
Right.
And
Like a
so,
payphone. Right.
yeah, it is. I mean, or a record player or
Right.
a rotary phone. I mean,
Right.
those are things that we all used to know, but you couldn't find it to save your life. Or a VHS player, things change. Even the best laid plans need to be reevaluated. And that I do believe.
Yeah, awesome. Well, listen, I know your time's very important, and I really appreciate you taking the time with us. And the voluminous of information has been tremendous. I think at the end of the day, Andy, as believers, it's faith in God, put our trust in Him. But if there's things that we can do, if you're watching right now, if there's things you can do, with hard assets, precious metals, I think you should make that investment. And be a part of, like he said, where the smart money's going, and use it as a hedge of protection, if you will, and as a form of a shield. I think you're going to need it in these final days and turbulent days for sure. Andy, would you tell us how to get a hold of you? I'm going to put your information up on the website, but tell us how to get a hold of you and all that good stuff.
So we do have a website at milesfranklin.com. It is still in development. It's about 90% done. We're implementing the tax software into it. We've been doing this for 33 years, but most of the time we've been a relationship-based business. And I reluctantly acquiesce to my staff and have built a website that will allow people to buy online up to $10,000. But some of the states we're not allowing it yet until all of the tax. There's a handful of states that have weird tax regulations, like California says no tax on metals unless it's under $2,000, or New York says no tax on metals unless it's collectible numismatics, or Minnesota says no tax on bars and rounds, but on coins, yes. So all these different little nuances that we are implementing should be done in the next week or two. You can go to our website for information to see some prices. But if you want our more competitive price list and to talk to one of our 14 brokers who have a very distinguished background, every one of them, and every one of them I would consider to be my friends, going back to most of them to grade school. My oldest friends in the world, several of them worked on Wall Street. Graduates from Wharton School of Business, master's degree in business administration from Temple. We have a very distinguished group of brokers that I'm very proud to call friends and business associates. We can answer your questions. You'd send an email at info at milesfranklin.com. Request a price list. Any questions you have, ask to be contacted, and Benjamin sent me, or Mr. Faircloth sent me, whatever you'd like them to say. We can keep track of it and know who we're talking to, and make sure that we treat your listeners the right way. If you have questions for me, address it to Andy, and I'm more than happy to answer those questions. So it's info at Miles Franklin. You'll get the very, very competitive price list, much more competitive than what we have online. And any questions that you have, or if you want to be contacted, we will certainly answer them and get right to you if that's what you'd like.
Wow, that's awesome, guys. That's a rarity right there to have that type of personal touch, especially with something so important to you. Andy Schectman, man, I really, really appreciate it. milesfranklin.com. It's been an honor, sir. I'm looking forward to talking to you again.
Let's do it. I agree. I like the vibe about you. I like the way that you look at things, and please invite me back anytime. I'd love to come.
Sounds awesome. Guys, be blessed. Remember, it's a life of faith, not fear. Take care.